The sun was just starting to burn off the morning fog when Jake Rollins pulled his dusty boots through the gravel of the old Burnt Creek flea market. Saturdays like these were usually slow, mostly rusted farm tools, knockoff belt buckles, and expired cans of beans no store wanted. But Jake wasn't there for deals. Truth be told, he wasn't sure why he'd come at all. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the feeling he couldn't shake since waking up from a strange dream that morning. Something about fire, howling, and a pair of yellow eyes watching him from a ridge. He shrugged it off, adjusting the brim of his tattered hat as he wandered between stalls. The market smelled of fry grease and old wood, the kind of scent that clung to clothes and memories. People nodded at him respectfully. Everyone in Burnt Creek knew Jake. Ex-rodeo man, retired cattle rustler, part-time fence fixer, loner, widower, man with too much time on his hands and too many ghosts in his boots. That's when he heard it. A low, guttural growl, mean and deep, coming from behind a half-broken table stacked with VHS tapes and rusty toy trucks. It stopped him in his tracks. No animal he knew made a sound like that without serious intent. Peering around the stall, Jake saw a boy, no older than 10, standing beside a cardboard box. Inside, a small black puppy, mutt-looking, dirty, matted fur, was baring its teeth and snapping at the air like it was fighting demons. Its eyes were wild, glowing almost amber in the shade of the tarp above. A metal tag on its neck read nothing but 13, scratched into the rust. The boy was barefoot, clothes hanging loose on his wiry frame, and he didn't speak right away. Just stared up at Jake like he'd been waiting for him. Jake nodded toward the pup. "Yours?" The boy answered flatly, "Not really. Found him in the woods. But he ain't normal," Jake chuckled, though something about the boy's voice made the hairs on his arm stand up. "What's that mean? He got worms or something?" The boy didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned down toward the box like he was talking to the pup, but his eyes never left Jake's. He bites. He don't eat. He don't sleep. Just growls. Ain't right in the head, but he'll choose who he wants. Jake tilted his head. "And how much for your little hellhound?" The boy held up a coin, a single quarter. 25 cents. Jake raised a brow. "You're serious?" The boy nodded once. "You'll need him, soon." There was no grin, no clever glint in the kid's eyes. Just an eerie calm that set Jake's nerves buzzing. Still, he didn't scare easy. And as his gaze locked with the dog's, Bandit he'd come to call him later, something electric passed between them. Not fear, not even anger, recognition. Like staring into the eyes of something old. Something that had known Jake longer than Jake had known himself. Jake reached into his pocket, pulled out a silver quarter that had been riding with him for 20 years, flipped it once in his hand, and tossed it to the boy. "Deal," Jake said. The boy caught the coin without looking, then stepped away from the box. "He's yours now," Jake bent down slowly. The puppy growled louder, lips curled so high his gums showed. But Jake didn't flinch. He wrapped his gloved hands around the pup, careful but firm. The mutt squirmed, snapped once, but Jake held on. He'd broken wild horses. A 10-pound pup wasn't going to shake him. As he stood, he looked back to say something to the boy, but the stall was empty. No kid, no table, no box. Just an open space between vendors and a cold breeze cutting through the late morning heat. Jake scanned the area, confused, but no one seemed to have noticed the boy at all. He turned the puppy around in his arms. "All right, you little devil. Let's see what you're really about." The dog didn't growl now. Just stared at him, eyes locked, still, watching. As Jake walked back to his truck, the pup curled tighter in his arms. He couldn't help but feel like he'd just signed something invisible. Like that old quarter hadn't bought him a dog, but something else entirely. The drive back to Jake's ranch was a long and silent one. The old truck rattled down the gravel road, tires kicking up dust like faded memories. Bandit sat curled on the passenger seat, tense and still. He didn't sleep, didn't whimper, didn't bark, just stared straight ahead through the cracked windshield like he knew exactly where they were going. Jake kept glancing over. He'd hauled wild animals before, coyotes caught in traps, half-mad bulls, even a bear once, but none of them had ever unnerved him like this pup did. It wasn't just the silence, it was the presence. Bandit radiated it like a coiled spring of something. Older, waiting to snap. When they pulled up to the ranch, a sun-drenched stretch of land bordered by dead trees and stubborn grass, Bandit didn't move. Jake opened the door, stepped out, and waited. Still nothing. "Suit yourself," Jake muttered, heading for the porch. The moment his boots hit the first step, Bandit leapt from the truck with unnatural speed, landing with a thud that echoed louder than it should have. He didn't run. He stalked. Jake's mutt, Dusty, an old shepherd lab mix, came limping from the barn, tail wagging. But the second he caught sight of Bandit, he froze. Then growled low, ears back. Jake stepped between them. "Easy, boys," but Dusty wasn't listening. And Bandit? He wasn't snarling. He just stood there, head low, staring at Dusty with that same dead calm that made Jake's blood run cold. It wasn't dominance. It was judgment. Dusty backed away, tail tucked, and retreated behind the barn. He wouldn't come near the house again for 3 days. That first week was hell. Bandit bit Jake twice, once when he tried to bathe him, another time when he reached for his bowl. Blood, deep punctures, cleaned out with whiskey and stitched by shaky hands. He tore up 2 boots, a saddlebag, and the screen door. Every time Jake raised his voice, Bandit stared at him like he was measuring him, deciding whether or not to strike. And yet, every night, Bandit would sit by the front door, motionless, like a statue, watching, guarding. When coyotes yipped in the distance, Bandit growled deep enough to make the boards on the porch vibrate. Neighbors stopped by to check on Jake. Word had already gotten around town about the demon pup. Most said the same thing. Put that thing down before it takes your face off. But Jake wasn't ready to quit. He'd buried a wife, buried 2 brothers. He wasn't about to bury a dog just because it was broken. The turning point came on the 9th night. Jake was in the barn, working late. Moonlight leaked through the slats, dust dancing in the beams. Bandit had followed him inside, pacing in circles, restless. Then he stopped, stiffened. His ears perked up. A low growl rumbled from his chest, not angry but alert. Then came the sound, a hiss. Jake turned in time to see the thick, coiled shape of a rattlesnake beneath a sack of grain. His hand went for the pitchfork, but Bandit lunged. The fight was fast, brutal. Bandit clamped down on the snake mid-strike, shook it violently, and tossed it across the barn. The thing writhed once before going still. Jake stared. Bandit's muzzle was bleeding, but his eyes were glowing again, dimly, like coals under ash. "You saved my damn life," Jake whispered. Bandit sat down, breathing heavy. Then, for the first time, he whimpered. Jake reached out slowly, cautiously, and laid a hand on the pup's back. Bandit didn't move. No growl, no snap. Just a slow, tired blink. "You ain't just mean," Jake said softly. "You're scared, aren't you?" Bandit leaned into his touch. Over the next few days, something shifted. Bandit stopped biting. He followed Jake everywhere, through the fields, into town, even into the feed store, where he growled at the cashier for calling him ugly. Jake started talking to him like a person. Called him kid sometimes. "We're both a little messed up," he'd mutter. "But maybe we're not done yet." Every night, Bandit sat by the door. Every morning, he greeted Jake with a nod, never a wag. He didn't wag his tail. Jake wasn't sure he even knew how. But the trust? It was building, like a fence slowly hammered into the soil between them. What Jake didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that Bandit's aggression had never been random. He wasn't born feral. He was made that way because something was coming. And Bandit had been trained to survive it. The wind came like a whisper that night, low, cold, and wrong. The kind of wind that carried secrets. Jake Rollins jolted awake just past midnight. The air inside the cabin was thick, almost heavy, like something unseen had entered and settled into the walls. His mouth was dry. His skin prickled. Outside, the usual chorus of crickets had fallen into complete silence. Something was off. Then came the sound, a low, guttural growl, like a distant engine rumbling under the earth. Jake reached for the rifle by his bedside. It wasn't coyotes this time. He could feel it in his bones. Bandit was already at the door, body tense, ears sharp, tail low. His amber eyes were locked on the darkness outside, unblinking, burning. Jake pulled on his boots, heart thudding louder than he wanted to admit. "What is it, boy?" Bandit didn't move. He just growled deeper, not at the door, but at the shadows beyond it. Jake swung open the screen door slowly, barrel raised, expecting maybe a bobcat or a wild hog nosing around the porch. But there was nothing. Nothing. Except the silence, and then a sound not from the ground, from above. He tilted his head upward and nearly dropped his rifle. Perched on the corner of the barn's roof was a figure, tall, thin, watching Jake. Blinked once and the figure was gone. Just vanished, like smoke blown into the wind. A chill clawed up his spine. "What in the hell?" Bandit barked, once loud, sharp. It wasn't a dog's bark. It was a warning. Suddenly, there was a sharp metallic rattle near the chicken coop. Jake turned just in time to see movement in the dark, a coiled mass slithering over the fence, fast and deliberate. His flashlight caught the scales, but they weren't normal. They shimmered like wet obsidian, eyes glowing green in the beam. A rattlesnake. Huge. No, massive. Unnatural. Jake raised the rifle. Too slow. The snake struck, but not at him. Bandit leapt, intercepting it midair like a bullet. The snake coiled around him, hissing furiously. Jake fired once, missed. Again, hit the dirt. The fight was chaos. Bandit twisted, bit, tore into the serpent's neck, refusing to let go even as its tail coiled and rattled like a death drum. And then, crack. The snake's body went limp. Bandit dropped it. But something was wrong. The snake didn't bleed. It didn't twitch, its body turned stiff, then began to crumble like burnt paper. Within seconds, the creature had turned to black ash, curling into the wind and vanishing into the night. Jake stared, speechless. What the hell kind of... Bandit turned toward him. His snout was bleeding, eyes glowing brighter now. Not like an animal. Not even like a dog, like something that had seen battle. Something that had been trained to kill things that shouldn't exist. Jake backed up a step. "What are you?" But Bandit only sat in the dirt, chest heaving, watching the spot where the snake had disappeared. He didn't look proud. He looked expectant, like he knew this wasn't over. Jake looked back toward the barn. The rooftop was empty. Still, he could feel eyes, watching, waiting, and then he noticed something. The side of the coop, scratched deep into the wood, a symbol. A spiral with slashes through it. Like someone or something had carved it with claws or a blade. Jake ran his fingers over it. Fresh, recent. Suddenly, the world seemed too quiet. The stars too still. Bandit growled again, low and warning. And Jake knew. This wasn't just a snake. It was a message. Someone had sent it, or worse. Something had. He looked down at Bandit, who was still bleeding but standing tall, and for the first time, Jake felt it not as fear, but as realization. This dog wasn't just a protector. He was a weapon. Jake Rollins couldn't sleep after that night. Even as the sun rose the next morning, warming the wooden slats of his cabin and brushing golden light across the plains, he felt it, the unnatural weight in the air. Like something had broken open. Like a curtain had been pulled back just enough to glimpse what wasn't supposed to be seen. He poured himself black coffee and sat on the porch, boots muddy and untied. Bandit lay by the door, breathing steady, his black fur gleaming with sweat and dried blood. He hadn't made a sound since the attack, just laid there like a guard dog carved from stone. Jake sipped slow, eyes scanning the tree line. No movement, but something was still wrong. It was late afternoon when Jake noticed the first marking. He'd been rinsing Bandit's wounds in a tin basin, hands moving slow. Cautious, not out of fear anymore, but respect. The dog didn't flinch. He sat there stoic, letting Jake clean the crusted blood from his ribs. That's when Jake saw it. Along Bandit's left shoulder, just beneath the matted fur, was a strange pattern. Not a scar, not a birthmark, a symbol. Faint at first, almost invisible. But the more Jake rubbed, the clearer it became. 3 interlocking triangles, burned into the skin like a brand. But not by any iron Jake had ever seen. The lines were jagged, uneven, pulsing ever so slightly beneath the skin. Alive, almost. Jake recoiled instinctively. What in God's name? Bandit turned his head, locking eyes with Jake. His tail didn't wag. But he didn't growl either. It was like he was saying, "You're ready to see now." Jake didn't go to the vet. He went to the old man on the edge of town. Walter Finch, part Cherokee. Part drunk and part crazy, according to most folks. But he knew stories. Knew symbols. Jake had done him favors in the past. And he trusted the old man more than any doctor with a clean lab coat. And across on the wall, Walter squinted at the sketch Jake brought, his hands trembling slightly as he traced the triangle pattern with a yellowed finger. "You sure this is a dog you're talking about?" he rasped. Jake didn't answer. Walter sat back, eyes distant. "That's not just a mark. That's a ward real old, used in tribes that don't exist anymore, marked on guardians, spirits that protect a chosen bloodline. But they're rare, dangerous, untamed. Some say they were pulled from the other world. Some say they were made from the pieces of warriors that wouldn't die." Jake's jaw clenched. "So this isn't just a breed thing?" Walter chuckled dryly. "Hell no. That dog of yours ain't natural. He's not evil, but he's not of this world either." He paused. "And if he's marked, then something marked him. Something that knew what it was doing." Jake left Walter's place with his hands shaking and his throat dry. He didn't stop in town. He didn't speak to anyone. When he got home, Bandit was waiting on the porch. Sitting tall, almost regal, Jake crouched next to him, resting a hand gently on his fur. "Who sent you?" he whispered. Bandit blinked, slow. A gust of wind passed, kicking up dust, and for a brief second, Jake swore he saw another figure standing behind the dog. A tall shadow cloaked in smoke and light, gone in the blink of an eye. Jake stood, his heartbeat hammering in his chest. Whatever this was, it went deeper than he thought. This wasn't just fate or luck. This was placement, preparation. Later that night, Jake had a dream. He stood in a burning field, ash falling like snow. Bandit was by his side, larger now, glowing from within. Around them, creatures moved. Shapes not fully formed. Crawling, snarling, whispering his name in voices that weren't human. And at the edge of the firelight stood a man in black. Eyes hollow. Face covered in the same markings as Bandit. "You've been chosen," the man whispered. "And so has he. The gate is waking." Jake woke in a cold sweat, gasping, heart ready to explode. Bandit was staring at him from the foot of the bed, eyes glowing softly. Jake whispered, "What gate?" Bandit didn't move. The next morning, another mark had appeared, this time on the dog's chest. Different from the first, circular, like a lock waiting for a key. Jake knew one thing now. These markings weren't appearing randomly. They were counting down to something coming, and Bandit wasn't just his dog, he was his warning. The days that followed were quieter, but not peaceful. Bandit had stopped growling at shadows. He no longer flinched at every creak in the floorboards or gust through the trees. Instead, he moved with an eerie calm, as if he were listening for something that Jake couldn't hear. Watching for signs that hadn't arrived yet, and Jake? He tried to pretend things were normal. Fixed fences, fed the horses, cleaned the barn. But the truth hung in the air like a storm that refused to break. He kept glancing over his shoulder. Every creak felt like a whisper. Every gust of wind carried weight. That morning, Jake filled Bandit's bowl with food. Raw meat, the only thing he would eat, and called out, "Breakfast. Soldier." No response. He looked around the house. Nothing. Bandit? Silence. Jake stepped outside, boots crunching on the gravel. The yard was empty. No paw prints. No torn-up ground. The porch where Bandit usually stood like a sentry was clean, as if he'd never been there at all. A chill ran through Jake's spine. He checked the barn, the coop, even the woodshed. Nothing. Just birdsong and the creak of old wood. Bandit was gone. The hours dragged like weeks. Jake circled the property again and again. He whistled until his throat was raw. He drove up and down the road for miles, scanning every ditch, every field, every grove of trees. He asked his nearest neighbor, a rancher 6 miles down, if he'd seen a strange black dog. "Not unless he's invisible," the man had joked. Jake didn't laugh. As the sun set, the shadows stretched longer across the land, and a deep unease settled in Jake's chest. Not fear. Emptiness, like a tether had been cut. Like something that anchored him was just missing. The next morning, the dream came again. The burning field, the shadowed figures. But this time, there was no Bandit beside him, only the voice, distant, drenched in static. "It begins where it ends." Jake woke, gasping. It wasn't until the third day that something changed. He was in the barn, barely sleeping, barely thinking when the horses began to whinny, loud and frightened. Dusty, his old shepherd, who hadn't come near the porch since Bandit arrived, began barking frantically at the back field. Jake grabbed the rifle and ran outside. At first, he saw nothing. Then, something shimmered. In the center of the pasture, near the old cottonwood tree, the air seemed to bend, like heat rising off asphalt. And in the dirt beneath it, something was buried. Jake approached slowly, breath shallow, pulse thudding like a war drum. No sign of Bandit, but half buried in the dirt was an object, metallic, round. He reached down, pulled it loose, and felt the world around him go silent. It was a badge. Rusted, weather-worn, but unmistakable. Sheriff's star. 6-pointed. Jake turned it over. There was a name etched on the back. The letters were faint, scratched, but readable. J. Rollins. Jake froze. He'd never worn a badge in his life. Never been a sheriff, never worked law. Neither had his father or his grandfather. But he recognized the engraving, the style, the font. It matched the one on a tombstone in the old cemetery. 20 miles west, the final resting place of Jeremiah Rollins, a lawman who died in 1872, a distant ancestor. A man Jake only knew from a single photograph. A photograph that showed Jeremiah Rollins standing beside a black dog, lean, alert, eyes glowing faintly even in the faded ink of the photo. Jake staggered backward. It wasn't possible. And yet, the badge was real. Cold. Heavy. He turned back toward the cottonwood tree, where the shimmer had been. It was gone now. Just dust and silence. No Bandit. No tracks. That night, Jake didn't sleep. He sat on the porch with a bottle of rye, badge clenched in his fist, and memories running wild in his head. He flipped the coin the boy had taken, Bandit's price, over and over in his palm. 25 cents. For what? A pet? No, a guardian. A messenger. A bridge. And now that bridge was missing, or worse, summoned elsewhere. Jake looked up at the stars, distant and cold, and whispered, "You didn't leave me. You were called." His voice trembled. "And if you were called, I need to know by what." The next morning, just as the sun cracked the horizon, Jake opened the door. There, on the porch, sat Bandit alive, clean, untouched, and in front of him, placed carefully on the wooden boards, was a second object, a human tooth, old, yellowed, wrapped in a piece of leather string. Jake stared at it. Bandit didn't move. Didn't blink. The message was clear. I've been somewhere, and whatever place that was, Jake would have to follow. Burnt Creek was a small town, the kind of place where strangers didn't stay strangers for long. So when a tall man in a dark overcoat stepped into Connolly's general store that Thursday morning, the wind seemed to change. The bell above the door jingled like it always did. But it rang too long, like it didn't want to stop. The few customers inside glanced up, then quickly looked away. He didn't belong. He wasn't dusty like the ranchers, or tired like the locals. He was sharp, almost surgically clean. Boots polished, collar stiff, eyes hidden behind round, black sunglasses that reflected nothing but your own confusion back at you. He walked slow, deliberate, and he didn't look at the merchandise. He looked at people. Jake was in the back, picking up feed and fencing nails when he heard the bell. He hadn't been into town since Bandit vanished and reappeared with the tooth and the badge. Since then, he'd been sleeping with his boots on and his rifle within reach. Something had shifted in the air around him. He couldn't explain it, but he could feel it. And now, he felt it again. Wrong. Cold. He peeked around the shelf and saw the man. Something in Jake's chest tightened. Not fear, recognition. The stranger approached the counter, spoke low to the cashier. The boy nodded hesitantly, pointed in Jake's direction. Then the man turned and walked toward him. Bandit, who had followed Jake into town and was lying beneath the shelf, stood up slowly. He didn't growl. He just stared, body stiff, fur bristling. "Jake Rollins," the stranger said, voice like silk dipped in oil. "Been looking for you." Jake straightened, hands tensing around the box of nails. "And you are?" The man smiled faintly. "Call me Mr. Ives." He extended a hand, but Jake didn't take it. Ives didn't seem offended. "I'm here about your dog." Jake's blood ran cold. "What about him?" "He's marked," Ives said plainly. "And those marks don't just appear. Not unless something very old has chosen him." Jake kept his voice calm, low. "You mind telling me how you know that?" Ives reached into his coat slowly and pulled out a photograph. Brittle, black and white, edges burned. He handed it to Jake. It was a picture of a man who looked just like Jake, but dressed in 19th century clothes, standing beside a black dog, nearly identical to Bandit. Jake stared. "That's Jeremiah Rollins," Ives said. "Sheriff? Died in 1872, but not before sealing a gate that should have stayed open." Jake swallowed hard. "You've got his blood," Ives continued. "So now the gate's looking to reopen. And your dog?" He smiled wider. "He's the key." Jake stepped back instinctively, clutching the photo. "You better start explaining yourself before this conversation ends with a bullet." Ives raised both hands, amused. "You think this is a Western, Jake? This isn't a fight you can shoot your way through." Bandit growled now, low and warning. "Tell your beast to behave," Ives said, glancing down. "He knows what I am." Jake's hands tightened. "And what are you?" Ives paused. His smile faded, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something ancient behind those glasses. "I'm someone who used to hunt guardians like him, until I realized they were protecting something far more dangerous than I ever imagined." Jake didn't blink. "Why are you here?" Ives took a step closer. "Because something has awakened. And it's coming for you." He reached into his coat again and handed Jake something else. A journal, leather-bound, old and cracked. "Your ancestor wrote this before he died. About the gate. The markings, the deals he made to seal it." Jake opened the first page. The handwriting was familiar, eerily so. His own, or close to it. "They gave me a guardian, but warned me he would return only when the gate stirred again. If he comes back, it means I failed." "It means it's opening." Jake looked up. "You're saying this thing that's coming, it's after me?" "No," Ives said, voice suddenly heavy. "It's after him." He pointed to Bandit. "And it won't stop until it tears every last shred of his spirit apart, so it can pass through him." Jake felt the ground beneath him tilt. "I'm not giving him up," he said firmly. Ives nodded. "Slowly. I didn't expect you to." Then he turned, and with one last glance over his shoulder, added, "But be ready. The gate doesn't knock. It tears through." As Ives walked away, the bell above the store door rang again, sharper this time. Bandit let out a single bark. Jake looked down at him. On Bandit's chest, a third marking had appeared, still fresh, glowing faintly red. The countdown had begun. The ranch had never been silent like this. Jake stood by the front window as night settled over the plains, staring into a horizon he no longer trusted. Even the wind had gone quiet, as if it too was waiting. Bandit lay by the door, motionless, his glowing eyes fixed on something Jake couldn't see. 3 markings now burned along the dog's side, glowing red in the dark. Each one pulsing like a warning siren buried under flesh. Jake hadn't told anyone what Ives had said. How could he? Who would believe that something was coming for his dog? That something older than history had chosen his bloodline as a battleground? Who would believe that a gate between worlds, whatever that meant, was preparing to open right here, on his land? And yet, deep in his bones, Jake knew it was true. He could feel it. 42 p.m., the power went out. No flicker. No hum. Just a hard, brutal snap, like the earth exhaled and killed the lights on purpose. The cabin went black. Every bulb, every outlet, Jake didn't move. Bandit stood up without a sound. Then came the noise, not from the front. From the earth, a low rumble like a heartbeat beneath the floorboards. The wood creaked. The walls trembled. Dust trickled from the ceiling as if the house was inhaling something that wasn't air. Jake grabbed the shotgun from the mantel, chambered a shell, and stepped outside. The night air was thick, too thick. His breath steamed even though it wasn't cold. He stepped off the porch slowly, Bandit following at his heel. Then he saw them. Figures. Not men. Not animals. Silhouettes made of shadow, bodies that rippled like oil in moonlight. They stood at the edge of the field, dozens, still, watching. Jake raised the shotgun. "You picked the wrong ranch," Bandit growled, low and unnatural, not like a dog. Like a warning bell rung from the spine of the earth. The shadows moved, not ran, glided, fast, wrong. They hit the fence line and didn't stop. Boards shattered like bones. The first one reached the yard, crawling across the dirt like it was swimming through air. Eyes hollow, limbs bending the wrong way. Jake fired. The shell hit it square, but the thing exploded into black mist, hissing, writhing in smoke. But two more followed. Bandit leapt. He collided with the first creature in midair, sinking his teeth into what should have been a throat but wasn't. The thing screamed. Not a sound of pain, but rage. Like it remembered being something else and hated what it had become. Jake reloaded, fired again. Another burst of smoke, but more were coming. Dozens more, inside, retreat, defend. Jake shouted, "Bandit, inside!" But Bandit didn't move. He stood in the yard, growling so hard the dirt vibrated. The third marking on his chest flared, brighter than before. Then everything froze. The air snapped like glass. The world itself seemed to take a breath and pause, and then they came through. From the tree line, a rip in reality opened. Not light, not darkness. Something in between. Like the world was splitting at the seams and something on the other side was laughing. From the tear, a figure stepped out, tall, slender, dressed in black. Its face was hidden beneath a porcelain mask. White, smiling, cracked. It moved like a man, but nothing about it felt human. Bandit backed up a step. Jake raised the gun. The masked figure spoke without opening its mouth. "The gate is not a place. It is a bloodline." Jake froze. "He is the lock. You are the key, and we are the storm that follows." The shadows surged. Jake grabbed Bandit by the collar and dragged him toward the cabin. The creatures followed, but as soon as they crossed the porch line, they burned, erupting into black flame. The cabin, somehow, was protected. For now. Jake slammed the door shut, heart pounding. Outside, the night screamed. Bandit was panting hard. Blood at his mouth, not his own. Jake dropped to his knees, clutching the dog's face. "What the hell was that? What the hell are you?" And then a fourth mark appeared. This time, it bled, a symbol neither of them recognized. Drawn in a circle of teeth. Bandit collapsed. Jake caught him. Eyes wide, breath trembling. "No, no, no. No, you stay with me," Bandit whimpered. Barely audible. Then Jake noticed it, carved into the door though he hadn't heard or seen it happen. Scratched by invisible claws, 5 words, words that made his blood run ice cold. "You are already too late." Jake looked at Bandit, then at the door, then into the darkness. And finally, he understood. The gate didn't want to open. It wanted to consume. The storm didn't pass. It just settled. By morning, the air outside was dead. Not quiet, dead. No wind, no birdsong. Even the flies seemed to avoid the ranch now, as if something ancient had claimed the soil, and nothing lesser dared to touch it. Jake hadn't slept. Bandit lay curled in the corner of the cabin, breathing shallow, his body trembling against the floorboards. The fourth marking still pulsed on his chest, bleeding, not from the skin, but from somewhere deeper. Jake sat at the kitchen table, the sheriff's badge, the leather-wrapped tooth, and the journal from Ives spread out in front of him. Clues, warnings, fragments, pieces of a puzzle that now screamed with urgency. He opened the journal again, and for the first time, he read the final pages. "I made the pact beneath blood and stars. They gave me the dog, not a creature, but a construct. A guardian made from loyalty and rage. A sentinel born from ashen soul. They told me he would serve me and every man of my bloodline until the gate stirred again." Jake blinked. A construct? But the dog is not eternal. He fades, resets, reborn every few generations into the same form, carrying memory not in mind, but in instinct. When he returns, he does not remember, but he remembers enough. Jake looked over at Bandit, whose eyes now flickered open, glowing faintly. "Jesus," Jake whispered. "You're not a dog." He crossed the room and knelt beside him. "You're a weapon." Bandit stared back, and something in that gaze, something human, told Jake he was right. But the worst was yet to come. Jake returned to the journal, his hands shaking as he turned to the final page, a page glued shut by time and blood. He tore it loose. There, in the center, were 6 words scrawled in shaky, broken script. "The gate doesn't want the key. It wants the one who holds it." Jake stopped breathing. His pulse rang in his ears. It had never been about Bandit. The creatures. The attacks. The masked figure. They weren't trying to destroy the Guardian. They were trying to weaken him, to isolate Jake, to get to him. The floor groaned behind him. Jake turned. Bandit was standing again, but not fully. His legs trembled, but his eyes were different. No longer just glowing. They were burning. Not with fire, but with remembrance. Jake backed up slightly. "Bandit?" The dog stepped forward, and as he did, the air around him began to shimmer, just like the night Jake found the buried badge. Then Bandit spoke, not with a voice. Not with sound, but with thought. It slammed into Jake's mind like a wave breaking against a cliff. "You are the blood. I am the bond. Together we sealed it. Together we must end it." Jake stumbled backward, heart racing. "What the hell are you?" he whispered aloud. Another wave of thought, heavier this time. More human. "I was Jeremiah's sentinel. I was reborn for you. Because you are the last. And the gate feeds on the last of the line." Jake collapsed into a chair, cold sweat on his neck. "All of this. Because of me?" Bandit blinked once. "Not because of you. Through you." Suddenly, the markings across Bandit's body began to glow brighter, flaring like embers brought back to life. The cabin itself seemed to respond, boards creaking, nails groaning in their sockets. Jake ran to the window. The horizon was changing, not the sky, the land. A ripple spread through the field, warping the earth like liquid. And in the center, a black spire was rising, slowly, like a tooth growing from the bones of the world. The gate. Jake turned back to Bandit. What happens if it opens? The final answer came like thunder across his soul. "It won't open, unless you let it." And then Jake remembered the masked figure's words. "You are already too late." But what if it wasn't a threat? What if it was a test? A prophecy designed to push Jake to the edge, to make him give up, to make him surrender Bandit, or worse, give in to the despair. Jake stood up slowly, shoulders squared. "No," he said. "I'm not too late." Bandit looked up, and for the first time in days, he wagged his tail. Once, the war hadn't begun yet, but the battlefield had been chosen, and Jake Rollins was done running.